making sourdough bread the least labor intensive and the easiest way you can do it, as long as you do have a kitchen machine, or what do you call it, KitchenAid. Most important part is to get the ratios right. If you want the kitchen machine to properly knead the whole thing, you need to ensure it's stiff enough to where the dough hook actually still works. So in my case, I use 800 grams of flour, I use 560 grams of water. That's 70% of the flour as water. And always start with the water. If you don't, you will not be able to, unless you do some manual work, incorporate the flour and the water. Important you start with the water. I warm up my water slightly, not necessary at all, it just speeds up the process when it's going to be rising. But you do you, it doesn't really matter that much. Turn it off, it's slightly hot. Bring it in so you can see what I'm doing. Add up to 560. Do it this way, can't see the numbers. That's 560. At this point, if you're making sourdough, you take 20% of 800, which is what, 160, and you add that to the water and you blend it in, or like incorporate it. In my case, I'm using instant yeast and 2 teaspoons. If you use less, it'll take more time to rise. If you use more, it'll take less time to rise. It's as simple as that. You don't have to be accurate. Here we go. At this point, we get 800 grams of flour. This flour needs to be, well, in the case of Europeans, I don't think we really have bread flour, but if you're American, bread flour. If you're not American, you need some type of flour that has a lot of protein content. Not all of those flours are created equally, but try to find something like Cuocao, C-U-O-C-A-O, or not an A in there, C-U-O-C-O, or similar, that just has a lot of protein. In my case, this has 13% protein. So this is the main flour because it has a lot of protein, which will help it build strength with the gluten. In my case, I also like to add some other flours for taste. So I'll do 650 grams of this flour. And then I'll fill up with some type of rough ground, or milled rather, other flour. Whatever you want, really. In my case, I use 150 grams. But you can mix and match as you want yourself. There we go. Now our bread is more or less finished. We'll put it in the KitchenAid, or stand mixer. Stand mixer is the word I was looking for earlier. You put it in the stand mixer, you let it mix for about 20 minutes. Then you put it into some container to rise, and you let it rise until it's almost doubled. And you divide it and you cook it, or what do you call it? Bake it. Oh yeah, right. You also add 2% salt to the mix as well. So take whatever amount of flour you have, 800 in my case, and you times it by 0.02, you get how much you need out of the flour, or salt, sorry. In my case, it's 18 grams of salt, 16 grams of salt. There you are. And we take it to the mixer. And you start the mixing. Doesn't really matter if you do it on high speed, low speed. extra high speed. Completely depends on what you want to do. The faster it goes, the quicker it goes. It doesn't really matter. The thing to learn about all of this is that most things don't really matter. You just need to feel it out. Do you want to see the bread being mixed? No? They're not interested? Okay, I'll put you down. If we had had more water, like 75%, 80% hydration as you call it, this would have been much more difficult to incorporate, which is why I keep it at such a low percent. Or like, it's still a high percent hydration, but it's lower than what many would want. This will be a shaggy dough for now. As it mixes and as it's being kneaded, it'll become more and more smooth. It'll look more like a cohesive thing. And sooner or later, it'll also, at least to some extent, tear away from the sides of the bowl. And at that point, you know that you're getting there. I'm gonna turn this off. It is fully separated from the sides. It's been going for what? About 20 minutes, I think. That's enough. At this point, you put it into a container of some sort. I like straight-edged containers because I can easily tell how much it has riced or not riced if something's going wrong. I also mark how far up the sides the dough is when you first put it into the container. But do as you please. You don't have to. Take this out. Now, take this whole thing out. Just making sure I get everything. And I'll dump it in here. At this point, I'll let it rise. As you can see, the red tape is the top of the dough I'm making now, at least when it starts relaxing and easing out, or like spreading out a little bit. The black tape is if I'm making 4 loaves of dough instead of 2, like I'm doing now. I'll be looking at about a double raise because I'm using instant yeast, and that makes the dough rise more than a sourdough starter would. If I am using a sourdough starter, I would be looking about 30 to 50% rise. So at this point, it has risen about half. Let's see if I can get down to show you. Just about. At this point, I'm gonna take it out and shape it. I just take it, and I forgot to mention this thing here. I line it with some oil just so it's easier to get the dough out. That's an optional step, I just like it. And I'm not too concerned with, well, I am concerned with what I put in my dough, but it's not the most important part in the world. Okay, so I'll just dump it out. There we are. And I'll just simply divide it in 2, roughly. I don't care if it's accurate or not. I'm just gonna do. The next thing is I want rectangular loaves. I don't want round ones, like bowls as they are called. So in my case, I'll first just very quickly shape them to round balls. Because if they're a uniform shape, it's going to make it a lot easier to shape them into the rectangles later. What I'm doing is I'm just pushing the plastic scraper under, tucking it over to the top, and then dragging it down. That'll tighten the dough down here while pushing them on the top. It'll just slowly but surely form a ball. At this point, the dough is quite taut, so I'll cover it with a kitchen towel and let it rest for 10-15 minutes, just so that the dough relaxes a little bit. It'll make it easier to form them afterwards. At this point, it's been resting for about 10 minutes, maybe. I don't want to wait any longer, so I'm just gonna do it. What I do at this point is I turn it around because the underside has got a tiny bit of a skin on it because it's not completely airtight. So it just doesn't stick to the table as much. And I stretch it out into a rectangle. And this forming here, it can be done any way you want. The only thing that's important is that the top of the dough gets taut, that you tighten the skin or whatever you want to call it. So in my case, I flip the top of the rectangle over. And I fold in the sides. So it's now a rectangle the other way. And then I take each of the side on top and I fold them in as well, which gives me more of an oval, like so. When I have that, I take the top of it and I fold that over, and I ensure to keep stretching the top here of the dough. You can say I take my thumbs and I drag it down. You can see this here gets tighter and tighter. Here we are. There's done. I'm just pinching in the sides because they don't look as nice. Then I take that. I take some sesame seeds, spread them out on a plate. And at the same time, I take the paper I'm going to lay it on. And I drizzle that with some flour, just so it doesn't stick to the paper, like so. I'll put that over there. I take this here, and I take it skin side up, or the top down is what I'm trying to say. I just roll it in the sesame seeds. There we are. And I put it on the paper. There we are. And then I take the bread pan and I put it in there. I'll do the same once more for the other one. Turn it upside down. Shape it into a rectangle. Just use the weight of it. Take the top, fold it over, take the sides, fold them in. It's now a rectangle the other way. Take the corners, fold them over as well. You get an oval, like looking like this. You take the top, use your thumbs to drag the top in and of it in over itself. Tuck in the sides. Get some more sesame seeds. Also, flour the paper, like so. Dunk it in the sesame seeds. Get as much or little coverage as you want. Put it in the paper, like so. Take the other bread pan, plop it in there. At this point, I would have normally scored and put it into the oven, but the oven is not hot just yet. So what I'll do now is actually put something over so we don't get more of a skin on it. And I'll actually put it in the fridge for a little while, because the colder the dough is, the stiffer it is and the easier it is to cut. This is not a necessary step, but I'll do it now just because I have time. The oven is now hot, so I'll take it out of the fridge. I'll score them real quick before I put them in the oven. Scoring just simply helps the dough, or guides the dough to where it should burst open, because it'll rise in the oven, and by scoring we tell it where it should be bursting open at. If we don't do it, it'll just burst some random place, most likely on the side or the bottom is what often happens. I'll just take a blade, score it almost a 45 degree angle. This does not have to be accurate at all, Doesn't have to look good, no nothing. We just want to make sure we guide the bursting of the bread. Or the rice, or whatever you want to call it. There we are. That's what it looks like. Oh, you fall down. At this point, I will take the loaf pans, or bread pans, or whatever you want to call them. And I have 2 of each identical. And I'll put it on top. What happens here is that when we put it in the oven, the bread itself has a lot of moisture in it. That'll evaporate and we got a bunch of steam, and we want to make sure that we trap it. If we don't, the bread will set before it has had time to rise, and you won't get as airy of a bread. So we just put the loaf pans on top to ensure we trap the steam. It keeps the bread soft for longer, and after a little while in the oven, we'll take the lids off and we'll let the bread itself set. Okay, so they have risen. That's a good thing. You can also see it is split along the seam here. Same goes here. And now I'll put it back in the oven. I won't even adjust the temperature because this was the easiest of them all, right? Just leave it as is. And I'll probably leave them on for 10 to 15 minutes. Hi, Antami. Hi. And the dog also wants to know what's happening because I'm talking to myself. And she probably thinks I'm talking on the phone. And normally when I do that, it's my better half and her favorite human. At this point, it's been in for about 12 minutes, I think it is. Almost always go darker than you're planning to, because you really need to burn it before it tastes burnt. And it's just going to add a bunch of flavor. At this point, it needs to rest. It should ideally be cold inside before you cut into it, or else it'll become gummy. That's just something to think about. It sucks, but it is the truth. What I'll do is I'll just put them on a rack so it can evaporate whatever moisture is left. There's one. There's two. So it's been about 2 hours. The bread is now cool to the touch and you can actually cut it. I will not cut it in the middle because I'm actually gonna eat it, but that's another story. And there you have it.